was Gotham Goodbye, a track off the eponym album by Franco-American jazz pianist, arranger, composer, and singer Franck Amsallem. Thank you so much for being with us on the show today. Now,
thank you for inviting me.
Such a pleasure to have you here. You recently released Gotham Goodbye, so this is your 10th album, and it's a tribute to New York City, where you spent about 2 decades recording with many great jazz musicians like Harry Belafonte, Charles Lloyd, Gary Peacock, the list goes on. What brought you to the Big Apple in the first place?
In the first place, I was studying in Boston, and I really didn't want to end my stay in the States so briefly.
You were at Berkeley, right?
I was at Berkeley in Boston, which is the main great jazz schools of the 80s and before. And I was going to New York City all the time, and I loved it. So I just couldn't come back to France, and I went to New York and stayed there for 20 years.
20 years. Well, that's a good reason to go to New York. Now, you moved back to France in 2001, if I understand correctly. So that's almost 2 decades ago. Why did you wait until now to say goodbye to New York City?
Well, the tune Gotham Goodbye was written after I had decided that I had to settle my stay in France and leave my stuff behind in the United States. And I wrote that tune because it was a very emotional moment for me. I realized that, yes, my life would have to be in France at that point. So I wrote that tune that night, and I entitled it Gotham Goodbye. And we thought that tune was also one of the most successful of the record. So we decided to title the record that way.
Well, we're going to listen to another song off the album. This is a live performance of the song From 2 to 5. Take a listen. That was a live performance of the track From 2 to 5. Your album features 9 original compositions with names like Last Night When We Were Young, Bâton Rouge, 12 to 4. Are these snapshots of your time in the US? What's the inspiration?
When you compose music on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, and you accumulate all kind of tunes, and you don't know if you're going to use them or not. And so you're going to decide later, and after a while, you just have a pile of music that you're going to
sort through.
Exactly, and decide what's going to happen of it. So this is the pile of music of the last few years that just accumulated, and when you finally get the green light to do a record, you decide, what am I going to use, what am I going to transform, what am I going to edit.
And this is the selection that you made. Now, what's interesting is on your previous 2 albums, you explored jazz standards and your talents as a singer. You should definitely check them out. What brought you back to composing your own material and more classic swing, I guess you would say?
Well, a career can be lengthy. Okay, my first recording was 30 years ago. So you have to have several moments in your development where you play the repertoire, play originals, play trio, play quartet, play solo, play big band. So this is the moment where I go back to playing what I think I do best, which is hardcore jazz. And being a frustrated saxophone player, because I started as a saxophone player, I adore playing with a saxophone player, especially Irving, who is a fabulous player. So I really adore playing with him, and also, which means that I can accompany him, which is also an art to itself.
And you mentioned Irving, and this is one member of this quartet that you've put together for this album. So you've got the Cuban saxophonist Irving Acau, Swedish double bassist Victor Nyberg, French drummer Gauthier Garrigue. It's a very multicultural quartet. Is that a reference to New York's multiculturalism, perhaps?
Maybe it is, but these musicians are among the most active in France, and they also Victor has studied in America and has a very American sound, and Irving, even though he's Cuban, sounds like a North American saxophone player also. So really, it's Gotham Goodbye, but those are my most American sounding friends and musicians that I chose for this endeavor.
And you live in Paris now.
I do, yeah.
Does the city inspire you the way that New York City inspired you?
The way New York City inspires me, no, but the different way, yes, because Paris is probably the most active jazz scene after New York, so it's very active. There are a ton of fantastic musicians I can play here with, and also musicians who stop by, and I know quite a few of them. So it's a very active jazz scene. I'm totally at ease here.
And you've had a very prolific career. You were mentioning the lengthy career that you've had. You've played across the world. You've received numerous awards, and some of your compositions have actually become jazz standards themselves. For instance, the song Out a Day. How does it feel to have your songs in what's kind of the holy grail for jazz musicians, which are the real or fake books, which are the scores that they use when they're learning?
Well, a funny story about this is that a lot of people ask me, how did you do it? How did you get your songs in the real book, which is the Bible? And I said, I did nothing.
Just wrote a good song.
It was picked on the radio by the editor, heard it on the radio, and way before the internet, tracked me down and asked for my permission and made me sign a contract to get those songs on the radio. I feel fortunate, it's not often, a lot of musicians never get their songs out there in those fantastic real book. I feel fortunate. I guess they're worth something.
It must be if they're in the Bible, as you said. We're going to move on to some other music news that's making headlines. And the French composer and musician Yann Tiersen, who burst onto the international scene in 2001 with the release of the soundtrack of the cult classic film Amélie, and its trademark sound, of course. Well, he's releasing a beautiful new album. It's called Portrait. Features 25 newly recorded tracks from throughout his career, including 3 new songs. Now, this album was recorded live at Tiersen's studio on a remote island in Brittany. The album is fully analog. Tiersen actually says that not translating sounds into 1 and 0 keeps music in the real world. Listen to a track off the album. It's called Rue des Cascades. So there's Yann Tiersen releasing an analog album. What's your recording process like? Are you more analog or digital?
Well, I'm sad to say that I went all digital, but I love the analog sound. But the analog sound also costs a lot more money to produce.
Of course.
And I like digital. It's the way to go. But some purists like analog. I can't blame them. Really.
And they make digital that sounds analog these days.
Exactly. Let's face it. Most people would not recognize the difference.
It's a purist thing. Yeah. Now we're going to move on to a bit of news. It might seem like yesterday that the British band Muse came crashing onto the world scene with their debut album, but that was actually 2 decades ago. To mark the 20th anniversary of Showbiz, the atmospheric rockers are releasing a massive box set called Origin of Muse. It features 9 CDs and 4 colored vinyls, including Showbiz, of course, but also the band's earliest, previously unreleased demos. Here's a sneak peek. Finally, after playing in Europe, China, and Latin America America rather, an energetic show about Michael Jackson has come to France. It's called Forever, the best show about the king of pop, and it features some 26 artists singing and dancing to Michael Jackson's greatest hits. The show isn't without controversy, of course, following the release of a documentary this year about allegations of sexual abuse by the singer, but the Spanish troupe that created the show in 2010 says it's all about celebrating the artist. We're going to leave you with a teaser of that show, but before we go, I want to thank my guest, Franck Amsallem. Thank you so much for being with us today. Do check out his album. It's wonderful, Gotham Goodbye. And for more arts and culture news, you can head to our website and stay in touch on social media. Stay tuned to France 24. More news coming up right after this.